Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Collection Spotlight talk this evening on the subject of architecture drawings. My name is Lil and I'm part of the RIBA Learning team. We deliver architectural activities through our National Schools programme and workshops for all ages. If you'd like to keep up to date with our events, please join our newsletter. Tonight we'll be hearing from curators of the RIBA Drawings and Archives collection, Fiona Orsini, Susan Pugh and Charles Hind, who are the authors of the recently published book, the Architecture Drawings book. During the talk, we will be featuring images from our collection of over 4 million items. Many of these can be seen on our digitised database, RIBA. So now I will hand you over to Charles and I will see you again at the end for questions. Enjoy.
Hello. I thought we'd begin by saying something about the RIBA and its collections of drawings. We started collecting when the Institute was founded in 1834. So we three curators and authors had the pleasure, or challenge, it was really both, of picking through a vast collection of over 1 million items to distill our choices for this book. A chance that was both exciting and scary. Our selection is intended to provide a general introduction to the wide range of drawings, practical and artistic, that architects have made over the last 7 centuries, as represented in the RIBA collections, rather than a connoisseur's selection of fine drawings. The focus is very much on the drawings and the purposes for which they are created, and rather less emphasis is placed on the architects themselves and their projects. My colleagues and I have picked out 6 examples of drawings in the book that are of particular significance or interest to us. The image on the screen is probably the earliest surviving depiction of a British architect's office, and in terms of light, equipment, etc., little would have changed between the Renaissance and the late 20th century. The only architect's office to have been preserved intact, by the way, is in Sir John Soane's Museum in London, of a similar date to this drawing. But in our talk about drawings this evening, we should begin with something about the RIBA's drawings collection and what we collect. There are many criteria for assessing whether an item, a project, or a whole archive should be acquired, but one has remained a constant for decades. That's the decision to collect the whole process of design, from the back of the envelope first idea to the presentation and working drawings. To a great extent, the sequence of the design process has been followed in our book, which also reflects the intention that the collection records how drawings have been made, from the scored lines subsequently inked over that Renaissance architects used, through to the digitally born drawings of the late 20th and 21st centuries. Mediums range from the quill pen to the modern felt tip, from watercolour to the collages made possible by commercially manufactured dry, rub-down instant lettering and artwork elements. From the 19th century, many drawings were reproduced in multiple copies by various processes, some of which left no original, inverted commas, drawing, and the book contains examples of such prints. In addition, our choices overall reflect the wide range of historical and contemporary styles and geographic location held in the collection, as well as objects rather than buildings designed by architects, and occasionally freehand and conjectural reconstructions of lost or ruined buildings. Sorry, occasions when an architect's imagination strayed into the realms of fantasy. There are also examples that show how the role of the architect as creator merges into that of an artist, one of which you'll see later. For members of the general public, the range of methods employed by architects to represent buildings and the design process is wide and can be confusing. We have tried to make clear the progression from first concept to the detailed drawings required by the builder in construction. However, architectural drawings are both the graphic means to an end, the end being the building, and an end in themselves. Some drawings are purely rational and scientific, such as those by the Italian Renaissance architect Andrea Palladio. Others particularly presentation drawings, can be compared with those by artists. At their simplest, designs are usually presented, next slide, as plans, elevations and sections, as you see here. A plan is like a map of a building, showing room divisions, walls and windows. The elevation shows the facade or partial facade of the building, whilst a section treats the building like a cake with a slice cut through to show the inside at right angles to the line of sight. All three types are shown in this sketch design for a Welsh chapel by Clough Williams-Ellis. Chronologically, the process of design that results in a structure being built begins with a concept sketch. This captures the architect's first thoughts on the many possibilities of how a commission might look. Sometimes dozens of sketches are needed before the general form emerges. This is followed by an examination of the relationship between the proposed building and its surroundings, and then a variety of ways in which the design is presented to the client for final approval. These can be measured plans and elevations, perspectives, or geometrical and axonometric projections. Once the design has been agreed, the architect conveys a slightly different set of designs to the builder and subcontractors, enabling them to cost the project and to build it. The contract drawings produced as part of this process are those agreed between architect, client and builder, and provide a standard against which the finished building can be measured if there's any dispute between the three. The working drawings then go into a level of detail, including fixtures and fittings, that is not usually required at contract stage. Alternatively, they resolve a problem that has arisen. One of our sections is about how architects learn from other architects. This may be from looking at existing buildings or parts of buildings in the form of sketches or surveys, both measured and freehand, and conjectural reconstructions of lost or ruined buildings. Another means was by writing and illustrating books, which has a long tradition going back to the dawn of printing. Ever since the Renaissance, architects have allowed their imaginations to wander freely and to commit to paper schemes that in many cases would or never could be built. Our sixth section is wide-ranging, from vertical cities to visionary town planning, student projects to stage designs. The fantasy element of such proposals also allows architects to express themselves as artists as much as practical designers of structures. Finally, we look at an area in which the technology is continuously evolving, born digital design. Despite computers being used in the design process from the early 1980s, in this rapidly developing digital age, it is perhaps surprising how many architectural practices did not use computers to design buildings until after the millennium, or at most merely tiptoeing into the future with varying degrees of enthusiasm. It did not take long before the disadvantages of over-reliance on computers became apparent, and that the abandonment by many architectural schools of the teaching of traditional drawing skills was becoming a problem. At least one major and very high-tech international practice a few years ago introduced, quotes, voluntary life classes for the younger staff to remedy the deficiency. Since the Renaissance, drawing from life had been a starting point in the training of architects. These days, it's generally accepted that for most architects, the future requires both drawing and digital skills. And some young architects are running the gamut of techniques: pencil, paint, Photoshop, and digital collage. Social media provide platforms for sharing new approaches to drawing and disseminating architecture. To say the least, the future looks interesting. And now I pass the baton to my colleague, Susan Pugh.
Hello. Just leading on really from Charles's introduction, just wanted to say that the drawings we've selected for this evening really are a rather eclectic bunch, chosen either because they're our personal favourites or that they offer additional stories which we wanted to tell but weren't able to actually fit into the book. We were also conscious that we wanted to show you a spread of drawing styles, dates, techniques and media. So this first drawing that I've chosen is a contract design for the principal tower of the Imperial Institute in South Kensington, London. I chose this particular drawing to start with as it illustrates several key architectural drawing types, namely elevation, plan, detail and cross-section. It's also an important example of one of the key roles drawings can play in the design process, that of a contract drawing. This pen, ink and watercolour work on linen was completed by the architect Thomas Edward Collcutt in 1888 and formed part of the contract drawn up between himself and the building contractors Mowlem, Burt and Freeman, then one of the UK's leading construction firms. Collcutt's signature can be seen in the bottom right corner of the drawing, and signatures of the three heads of the construction firm can be seen in the top right corner, John Mowlem Burt, W.R. or William Robert Freeman and George Burt. And these can be seen in the detail at the top corner there. The addition of the signatures render the drawing a legal document, formalising the agreement between the architect, contractor and client. Collcutt had been asked by Her Majesty's government, and thereby indirectly Queen Victoria herself, to design a new building to celebrate her Golden Jubilee and to promote the commercial and industrial prosperity of the empire. It was to be a large structure that would be able to house a centre for carrying out research into the resources and raw materials of the empire, and to provide a meeting place for overseas visitors, to help expand trade and have alongside spaces for exhibitions and conferences. It was also to act as an emblem of imperial unity, to incorporate architectural motifs from across the colonies. For example, the small ogee domes, which can just be seen here below the main dome, which are themselves flanked by statues of exotic animals from overseas. I hope those can just about be seen on the very tops of the elevation. This drawing is from a series of more than 20 which helped make up the contract. As such, the drawings all contain considerable detail, including aspects of construction. What we see here is the principal tower, later known as the Queen's Tower, which sat in the centre of the building. The main frontage was a substantial 700 feet wide, but the tall tower dominated the site. Collcutt has packed lots of information onto the sheet, which measures 73 by 53 centimetres. In the centre, he includes plans of each of the floor levels of the tower, but as a symmetrical structure, he deemed it only necessary to show half of the plan, thereby combining floor A with B and C with D, thereby maximising how much information he could include on the sheet. So if you can just about deem the sort of the plan A and B, you'll also see those letters corresponding to those floors on the cross section on the right hand side. Above the plans, he also features a construction detail of a safety feature incorporated into each of the floors, that of a trapdoor within the fireproof floors, and these again can be seen on each of the plans in the centre. One of the original functions of the tower was to house the water tank to service the building, and this can be seen in the middle of the cross section, sat on massive compound beams which were added below to support it. Also visible on the cross section are the narrow spiral staircases which run up the side of the building to a viewing gallery towards the top. The imposing building opened in 1893. However, from the outset, the institute itself was not a great success, and following a series of changes in function and the incorporation of the institute into Imperial College, part of the University of London, the building was proposed for demolition in 1956. There was considerable opposition to the proposed destruction, including not only from the Royal Fine Arts Commission and other bodies, but also from members of the general public. The RIBA archive holds a file of papers documenting this campaign. As a result of the protest, it was decided to retain the central Queen's Tower that we see here, but by 1962, the rest of the building had gone. The tower is today closed to visitors, but it can still be admired within the grounds of Imperial College, and the original copper dome acts as a local landmark with its now eye-catching green colour due to oxidisation and age. At the top of the tower is a belfry in which the Alexandra peal of bells hang, a collection of 10 bells, all named after members of Queen Victoria's family. and these bells can be heard on royal anniversaries and Imperial College graduation days. So if we have the next slide, be on to my second choice. Thank you. This is something obviously very completely different and takes you up to the present day and onto digital architectural drawings. This is a recent acquisition for RIBA Collections, and it's from a contemporary practice and Sterling Prize nominee, CSK Architects, and it's their design for the Cork House in Eton in Berkshire from 2019. Information technology and digital drawing have revolutionised the way architectural practices work. It has, however, been a slightly slower change in practice than some might realise. AutoCAD was the first computer-aided design package to be released commercially in December 1982. And up until the turn of the millennium, many practices were only able to complete complex presentations digitally if the computer was still being used essentially as a drawing board. With the arrival of much greater number of software packages, and in particular those set up for 3D visualizations, for example, Corona Renderer, which was created in 2009, Rhinoceros 3D, which was released in 2020, the transfer to digital working has now really taken hold. A huge advantage of producing a drawing digitally is the ease with which it can be shared with colleagues, stakeholders, clients, and partners. Drawings can be viewed and even simultaneously amended while partners are working together remotely, perhaps even located in different countries. A fantastic example of the way digital design can open up new methods of working and building techniques is the Cork House, this multi-award-winning private residence in Eton, Berkshire, designed by husband and wife team Matthew Barnett-Howland and Dido Milne of CSK Architects, in partnership with Oliver Wilton, who's an Associate Professor of Environmental Design from University College London. Along with Fiona, I was lucky enough to get to visit the house in 2021 and was guided around the amazing property by the architects themselves. I'm very grateful for that visit. We all thoroughly enjoyed it. The project evolved over several years using a self-build construction system developed in collaboration with a number of partners, including the Bartlett School of Architecture, UCL, University of Bath, and Amarin UK, a cork processing company. CSK Architects designed a unique two-bedroom house to be made almost entirely from expanded cork blocks, a building material which is carbon negative at completion and has exceptionally low whole life carbon. What we're seeing here is an elevation of the Cork House created by the design team in AutoCAD LT. This particular software is used for precise 2D drafting, design and documentation. It includes features to automate tasks and increase efficiency, such as allowing drawers to be quickly and easily compared. It also enables the users to create, edit and annotate drawings via a computer desktop, as well as on a mobile device, which is obviously incredibly helpful for site visits and so on. The elevation that we see here shows the 5 connecting pyramids which make up the property. It sits alongside Tangier Mill, a Grade 2 listed early 19th century building, which we can see on the right, and behind to the left is the filter house for Thames Water. The site is effectively a small island off the River Thames with a leat or man-made watercourse leading to the mill. The surrounding structures and riverside location were key considerations when designing the house, and all are featured in this elevation. The choice of cork fulfilled the sustainability criteria the team was seeking, but it also helped the structure blend into its surroundings with its natural colour and texture. To show the building in colour and demonstrate its monolithic structure, the design team needed to move away from AutoCAD LT, which doesn't have much visualization or presentation features, and use other software packages with greater rendering capabilities. So this digital drawing on the left is entitled Design for Disassembly. It was created using a variety of software packages, but most of the work was completed in Corona Renderer, which is a computer-generated 3D imagery rendering software created by a Czech developer in 2009. It's frequently used for architectural visualizations and was rebranded in 2022 as Chaos Corona. The design for disassembly is effectively an exploded diagram showing the arrangement of tongue and groove blocks which form the walls of the building. Cork House was conceived as a kit of parts really to enable easy disassembly, reuse or recycling. The image on the right-hand side that we feature is not actually featured in the book, but I've included it here this evening as it helps to explain both the construction process for Cork House, but also highlights the invaluable role which digital drawing and technology played in the project. It was also a favourite of the architects for this very reason. What we see is a CNC laser cutting one of the cork blocks for the house. CNC, abbreviation for computer numerically controlled. The precision with which the laser is able to cut the blocks enabled a friction-fit assembly process on site without the use of mortar or adhesive. Constructing the building in this way created a greener structure with a lower carbon footprint and greater scope for reuse. CSK's work in this area is featured in the current exhibition in RIBA's Architecture Gallery at 66 Portland Place, which is entitled Long Life, Low Energy, Designing for a Circular Economy. And I'd encourage you all to go and have a look at it if you're able to do so. The show closes this April. This last image I just wanted to quickly show you. It's again not featured in the book, but I included it this evening as it's a rather attractive image which shows an example of this sort of busy desktop and the array of tools available. And so yet another software package CSK Architects used during their design work. It's a perspective of a prototype made during the early stages of the Courthouse project, and the drawing was created in Rhinoceros or Rhino 3D. Very useful package for computer-aided manufacturing, rapid prototyping and 3D printing. So there's now an abundance of software packages on the market available to architects and design professionals. So today the choice of media available to architects goes significantly beyond simply pencil, ink or watercolour. And with that, it seems fitting that I'll pass you to my colleague Fiona Orsini, who's going to take you back to the 20th century.
Thank you, Susie. So here we have a drawing from the 1930s of a building that you're all, I'm sure, very familiar with, which is a Battersea Power Station, drawn by an American illustrator. And this is actually taken from the presentation section of the drawing book. This atmospheric perspective of the iconic Battersea Power Station, located on the south side of the Thames, shows the building as it was in 1934, in the first phase of its construction with just 2 chimney stacks. Initially designed by architects James Halliday and Charles Agate, the renowned architect Charles Gilbert Scott was brought in as the consulting architect in 1930 to improve Halliday's elevations and details. The power station was built in 2 phases, A and B. Battersea A station comprised of just 2 precast concrete chimneys and officially opened in 1935. Work on Battersea B started in 1937, adding a 3rd chimney, but due to the outbreak of the Second World War, it didn't actually start generating power until 1944. Finally, the 4th and final chimney was built in 1955, completing the building's famous upturned table silhouette. Scott held particular respect for the realism of the work of American artist Alonso C Webb, mainly known as AC Webb, and chose him to create this presentation view of Battersea. Born in Nashville, Tennessee, Webb attended the Art Institute of Chicago, and then, like many illustrators of architecture, went on to study architecture, in Webb's case, at the University of Illinois. Following graduation, he practiced in both Chicago and New York. Having served with the American engineering forces in France during the First World War, Webb remained in Europe during the 1920s, producing architectural images of American cities such as New York and Chicago for the French weekly journal Les Illustrations. In the 1930s, he moved to London to continue his commissions, and as an artist and illustrator, where he remained until his death in 1975. And just to say that it's likely that this drawing, we don't know for sure, but it's likely that this drawing was produced for publication, possibly for the same French journal, but it's likely that it was definitely published. Following its decommission in the 1970s, Battersea Power Station remained empty until 2014, during which it fell into a ruinous state. Its architectural importance was recognised with it being awarded Grade 2 listed status in 2007. And several different plans for its redevelopment were proposed over the years, but unfortunately none was successful. However, finally, following an agreement with a consortium of Malaysian investors, the power station and surrounding site has finally been developed and given a new lease of life as London's newest shopping and leisure destination, including a lift and glass observation room at the top of the Northwest Tower, with a 360-degree views of the London skyline. So here we have a very colourful image, which was created by Balkrishna Doshi. And the reason I've chosen this particular illustration is in honour of the Indian architect Balkrishna Doshi, who has sadly recently died at the age of 95. Doshi is regarded as a pioneer of modern brutalist architecture in India, gaining him international recognition and leading him to be awarded both the Prakriti Prize in 2018 and only last year the RIBA Royal Gold Medal, the UK's highest architectural honour. Having travelled to Europe in the 1950s to work with Swiss architect Le Corbusier, Doshi returned to India in 1954 to supervise the building of Le Corbusier's designs for Ahmedabad. A year later, Doshi set up his own architectural studio and worked closely with the American architect Louis Kahn, designing the campus of the Indian Institute of Management. Doshi's own work mostly focused on low-income housing and urban planning, incorporating sustainable design in groundbreaking ways. Doshi's style of presenting his design ideas is unique, as it often used the traditional Asian technique of silkscreen printing. Created using a mesh and historically made of silk, ink or dye is transferred onto a printed surface, except in areas made resistant to the ink by a blocking stencil. One colour is printed at a time, meaning that several screens can be used to produce a multicoloured image or design, as seen here. This bird's eye view, depicting an imagined idea for a housing scheme next to the water, uses bold blocks of colour to show single-storey houses nestled amongst the abstracted trees, sitting next to a deep blue expanse of water, most likely the sea. Although unconventional in its approach and having more in common with a piece of artwork by Matisse, this design would have just started out as a freehand sketch before starting the screen printing process. This form of presenting designs became Doshi's signature style and is one of a number of colourful designs that the RIBA holds in its drawings collection. Now I'll pass you on to my colleague Charles.
Thank you, Fiona. Well, we now go back into history to the early 17th century with this design for a closet, which in 17th century parlance was a small and intimate room rather than a cupboard. The little castle at Bolsover was one of those Jacobean toy castles popular in the early 17th century, evoking a lost and largely imaginary age of chivalry, and here built on the site of a genuine medieval castle on a hilltop in Derbyshire, with spectacular views over a wide valley below. It was begun by Robert Smythson, born about 1535, and completed after his death in 1614 by his son John. The client was Sir Charles Cavendish, the younger son of the William Cavendish who built Chatsworth House in the same county. Robert Smythson came from a family of stonemasons and building contractors who were the ancestors of architects. The great Gothic cathedrals of the Middle Ages, for example, were designed by masons, The concept of architects didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Architects as a profession did not begin to emerge until the Renaissance. Smythson's son John completed the exterior, designed the interiors, and added enormously to the castle, so that the little castle could function as a cosy family wing, with the rest of Bolsover given over to spaces for large-scale entertaining. And most of the rest of the castle is now a ruin. The RIBA has a large collection of designs by both Robert and John, which were bought in 1927. This is a particularly important drawing, as it is probably the first surviving English design for an interior drawn in perspective. It shows a stone-paved room with tapestry wall hangings, a corner fireplace, and a vault of polished black and white marble. Although it's unlikely that John Smythson had the extensive personal experience his father would have had as a practicing mason, it does show a stonemason's idea of a design rather than an architect's, for it is conceived almost as a model. The windows at the far end are actually flaps that can open as if to reveal the view outside. The plan indicates that there was a balcony, here described in the language of the day, as you look on the plan, as a pergola. In the event, although this room was built, Smythson's idea for the marble vault was actually transferred to another room. As was common at the time, when paper was expensive, Smythson incised the lines of his design onto the paper, first using a bone stylus, and then he inked in the lines afterwards when he was satisfied with them. That is when he would have added the dotted lines, the inscriptions, and the dimensions. All this made for a design that the client would have understood in every detail. This is something completely different. This is architect working as an artist, effectively. It's a huge watercolour that measures 80 by 140 centimetres, and it was painted by Charles Robert Cockerell in the mid-1830s and exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1838. I'm particularly fond of it for several reasons. When I was at university, one of the papers for finals in the history course I took was on English architecture 1660 to 1720, and Wren was, of course, central to it. Wren's first building, the Chapel of Pembroke College, Cambridge, was begun in 1663, and his masterpiece, St Paul's Cathedral, was not yet quite complete when he died in 1723. I took my degree in another of his buildings, Sheldonian Theatre, which you can see with its cupola lower right. And in the 1980s, when I was working for Sotheby's, I was involved in the sale of Cockerell's preliminary drawings, of which you can see two here, which was subsequently bought by the RIBA. And in 2006, I had to raise the funds to buy the finished paintings for the Institute. Cockerell, as you can see, was a brilliant draftsman. As an architect, he began working in the Greek Revival style, not surprisingly, as he had become a significant classical archaeologist in Greece during an extended grand tour lasting from 1810 to 1816 that included Turkey and Asia Minor. The traditional grand tour took in France and Italy, but because the Napoleonic Wars were still raging, more adventurous grand tourists bypassed Italy and went on to Turkey and Greece. In 1819, he succeeded his father, who was also an architect, as surveyor of the fabric of St Paul's Cathedral. And although he was initially dismissive of Wren, he soon became a great admirer as he began to understand his predecessor's remarkable achievement. And Cockerell's later work reflects his enthusiasm for the English Baroque. Wren was very much out of fashion in the century following his death, and it was a surprise to the public when Cockerell exhibited this drawing in 1838, and it began a revival of Wren's reputation. In fact, Wren's huge popularity from the mid-19th century until the 1950s as the greatest British architect can be traced back to this watercolour. And it was this respect that was the reason why a sculpture of Wren representing all architects was positioned on the facade of the RIBA's headquarters in Portland Place in 1934. Wren revival buildings were built in enormous numbers across Britain and the British Empire, from Canada to Australia, and even in the United States, where numerous state legislatures and courthouses sport domes based on St Paul's or the Royal Hospital, Greenwich. And in the days when architects were commissioned by banks to design buildings that represented solidity, tradition, and trust, Wren's buildings, or partial rebuilding of Hampton Court, was a fruitful source of inspiration. So if you look down many high streets still, you'll find bank buildings of red brick with white Portland stone dressings built in the Wren manner. Constructing this enormous panorama was no mean feat. Cockerell began by sketching all the buildings then known or believed to be by Wren. Architectural history at this stage was in its infancy, and at various stages during the 19th century, Wren's name as architect was attached to practically every building built between about 1650 and 1730. Architectural historians have been busy reducing his oeuvre ever since. Cockerell then mapped the buildings onto a huge sheet of paper the same size as this watercolour, penciling in the outlines, and this preliminary version still survives, belonging to the family. And it was enhanced with brown and grey washes. When Cockerell had arranged all the buildings to his satisfaction, he then traced them onto another sheet here and applied the full range of watercolour. The drawing has faded. A large drawing like this has always been out and hanging and exposed to light. So what looks like a London smog is in fact the result of fading of principally of the blues in the sky. This is a drawing from a more leisurely age. The preparation and planning must have taken months alongside a busy professional practice, and it is one of my favourite items in the RIBA collections. Now I hand back to Lil Adams.
Hi, thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. We've got some time now for questions for the curators. If you want to pop any questions in the chat, that would be great. We've already got one really nice question here. Thank you, Wilson. It just says thank you to you all for wonderful images and talk. And here's two questions actually. And we'll go to Charles first, if that's okay. And so that says, were there any drawings you would have liked to have included in the book but couldn't? Also, do the curators have a preference for digital or hand-drawn drawings?
Yes. I think, well, yes to your first question. Yes, I think all of us would have liked to have included far more drawings in the book than we were able to. The preparation of the book took place, a lot of it took place during the lockdown. And we didn't have access to the collections in the way that had originally been intended. And I think we've all, since the final selection was submitted to the publishers, we've all come across drawings we think, oh, that would have been a great drawing to include. But at the end of the day, we were limited in the range of drawings. So I think I have no regrets about any of the drawings that we did include. I just do have regrets about some drawings that we could not include by reason of space. I don't know if Fiona or Susie would like to add their own views on Wilson's question.
We would, but also you have to say digital or hand-drawn, Charles.
I think I show my age and say that I find hand-drawn because I could appreciate far more the skill of the architect transferring his or her ideas to paper and not being able to make a mistake. Of course, with a digital design, if you do make a mistake, you can correct it and nobody's any the wiser. With hand drawing, it is much more difficult to conceal your mistake. You either have to sort of throw the paper away and start again, or you just get it right first time.
Thank you. Fair enough. I'll pass to Fiona now.
In terms of the choosing of the drawings, I mean, yes, as Charles says, it was actually really quite difficult because we were a little bit restricted right at the beginning with our selection because we were all working from home. We couldn't even get to our collections to make those selections. But we also, we had these different sections which you'll see in the book. So it was trying to represent them, but also deciding really what those sections were and actually how you define them in terms of the types of drawings, because one drawing could actually fit in possibly one or two or even three of the sections. So yeah, that was quite difficult. But like Charles says, I certainly don't have any regrets about what we chose. It's always nice to be able to show things that perhaps haven't been seen before or are relatively new acquisitions, but sometimes it's just not practical. In terms of the second question, I mean, actually, I would say both, because I suppose first and foremost, I do love hand-drawn drawings, but more and more we're receiving drawings into the collection that actually are a combination of both, where you have initially a kind of a technical drawing, the outline of a technical drawing that's been born digitally, and then it may well have been printed off and then hand drawing added to it afterwards. So you've got all these sort of different layers and the characteristics of both the born digital and also the hand drawing, and that's always very interesting. And then it might then be scanned again and then created in a digital format. So it's not that straightforward, and that can be quite difficult to decipher then in terms of what is born digital and what is hand drawn if it's then scanned afterwards. So that's quite a complicated answer, I know, but that is the reality of what we're dealing with now. It can be a combination of two.
Thank you. I'll just send it to Susan now.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Charles and Fiona's arguments for how we chose and the challenging situation we were in actually making the initial choices. One other factor in it as well, that we were trying to make sure that we were including as many not published before images. So again, drawings that were either recent acquisitions or things that just haven't been published. So I mean, I'm a huge fan of Alfred Waterhouse, and again, so we had quite a lot of his drawings published, but possibly one of my personal favourites from the RIBA's drawing collection is a beautiful watercolour we have of the interior of the Natural History Museum, which probably you've seen before because it has been published many times. So that would have been my personal preference, but we avoided that for that reason. On the question of hand-drawn and digital, again, I would say the same as Fiona, a combination of the two. Possibly I would err towards hand-drawn sometimes, and also as a curator, at the moment, the digital drawings actually give us possibly more challenges in terms of acquiring and storing and cataloguing and so on. So I'm quite interested to see how it's quite a period of change for us, and how we're going to be collecting and how things will be stored in the future, and how we're actually able to sort of access and interrogate those digital files. I think there's going to be big decisions, big issues for us in the future, and depending on how our own technology evolves and our own storage facilities evolve. But I think, yeah, maybe the answer to that question could hopefully change in 10, 20 years when the situation becomes sort of easier for us to store and analyse those files.
Thank you. I'll stick with you, Susan, if that's okay. I've got a question about the cover of the book. I've actually got two questions from Jonathan and Catherine. One of them, Catherine's very happy that you've chosen that, the Brunswick Centre in Bloomsbury. And Jonathan wants to know why we didn't feature it in the talk. And also, Catherine wants to know why you chose it for the cover. If you know it, or you can pass it on.
I'll answer a bit of it and then I will pass it on. We chose a number of axonometric views, particularly in conjunction with our editor and the publisher. We wanted to kind of get quite a striking image, a little bit technical, but also an attractive drawing. And I think this particular one with Brunswick ticks all those boxes. We didn't feature it this evening. Actually, it was Fiona who wrote the caption for the drawing for the Brunswick Centre, which is a different image actually than the one on the cover. And as I say, that was more chosen in due with the publisher and the editor. So in terms of more background to that, I think it's probably best if I pass to Fiona.
Yes, I mean, we've actually got Brunswick twice, as Susie alluded to, because we've got it on the front cover, and then we've also got a different drawing inside, which I wrote a little bit more in more detail about. I think, as Susie alluded to, the reason this was chosen, we did actually go through quite a number of different choices for the front cover, but the reason this was chosen, particularly by RIBA Publications, was that it does actually show, you know, that you've actually got three different types of drawing in this. So you've got a sectional view, and you've got a projected, almost sort of axonometric, but it's sort of showing the full street of the Brunswick, and so yeah, it's you know, it is quite a striking image. I mean, in terms of not talking about it, you know, that we've got so many drawings. We've got you know, nearly 300 drawings, I think, in the book, so it's quite difficult to decide which ones to choose. But I suppose we were quite driven by some of our sort of personal favourites, and certainly for me, the one I talk about, the Battersea Power Station, that has always been one of my favourite drawings because it's so evocative of London and its in the past, and the kind of industrial history of London, and so yeah, so I suppose that was the reason why we didn't choose it. But obviously, if you buy the book, you'll be able to read more about the Brunswick Centre and that particular drawing that we feature.
Thanks, Fiona, and good plug, everyone. I did put the link to the book in the chat as well. I'll stick with you, Fiona, for a minute for a question from Miles. Do feel free to pass it on. Do you think digital or CAD drawings are more difficult to appreciate for artistic merit?
Yes, I think they are. Well, certainly the drawings that we're sort of starting to get into the collection, they're still quite, still kind of sort of early stages of CAD, and it's still, because CAD was still in its sort of infancy in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. The examples we have in the collection are, in some instances, a little bit clunky and a little bit crude looking. I mean, nowadays, some of the images you see out there are incredibly sophisticated and look amazing. So I think those certainly are appreciated more. And sometimes it's difficult to tell whether it is hand drawn or whether it's you know, whether it's created in a born digital way. But yeah, anyway, I think Susie's going to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think just something to touch on, which is probably quite obvious, really. I think as well is I think maybe in the future, as people are more used to using computers in their own work and so on, that generations to come, perhaps it will be easier for them to appreciate them artistically. For myself and sort of older generations, I think it is more of a challenge. I mean, we're all used to having picked up a pencil, and as a child, everyone's done drawings of some sort. So that's you know your own sort of drawing ability and so on, but nobody really quite knows how we produce these drawings digitally. So I think that it's very difficult to sort of really fully appreciate it when you haven't had a chance to have a go yourself. But so I think again the answer to that question might change in years to come when the technology is more openly available and perhaps we've got sort of more of an appreciation and understanding of it ourselves. I think Charles wanted to add something as well.
I want to say something about the collaborative nature of architectural drawing over the years, because we have focused on the draftsman, the architect or artist who drew, rather than the practice that was responsible for the ultimate design. But just as, for example, Fiona talking about Alonso Webb being responsible for that perspective, historically, if an architect couldn't do a perspective to his or her satisfaction, they would perhaps farm it out so that the perspective of the building might be done by one person, and the trees and the figures and passing cars or carriages, whatever, would be added by a professional artist. And the same goes for the sort of digital work. It is less easy when you're dealing with the work from a practice to say so and so was the sole person responsible for the image that finally emerges. So architectural drawing is often very much as a collaboration.
Thank you. Questions coming thick and fast now. If anybody wants to put their hand up if you fancy answering this one. Let me go back, sorry. What role do you think VR will have in future designs and the challenges this will bring to architects? Anybody that fancies that one?
Well, I think virtual reality is, somebody will probably shoot me down on this, but this is more to do with presentation and I suppose the latter day equivalent of the perspective, allowing well, I suppose it would be included, I suppose, as part of the process of design of understanding the spaces that the architect's designing. I'm inclined to think it would end up being more for the client to understand what exactly they're getting for their commission. I think it'll be one of the tools or one of the weapons in the architect's armory. So I imagine it will play a role. It may be too soon to know quite what role. I think Fiona's got something to say.
I mean, architects already use sort of 3D animation, sort of fly-throughs, which are pretty much doing a similar thing to VR. Like Charles says, I mean, anything I think to help the client imagine what their design's going to be, and that so many different methods have been used over the centuries, and some of that is explored in the book. It's all about trying to get that job, isn't it? It's trying for the client to understand what they're going to get in terms of their design. So I think VR might have a place, but practices vary so much in terms of the way they approach. Some of them are still very much working in the analog with a little bit of digital, maybe for the sort of more working drawings. Others, in terms of sort of presentation, will use lots of different types of animation packages, but they cost a lot of money and they take a lot of time to put together. So I think cost, but budget will come into it as well.
Do you think there's a specific type of drawing that was perceived better in the past by builders?
Well, we'd have obviously with the working drawings that would be taken sort of potentially on to site with the builders. So there'll often be sort of details. So those I'm quite sure meant by the question, but the same perceived by or sort of understood by the builders, then that would be the drawing type that they would be using and most familiar with. And again, within that you would probably have different specialists, whether it be a stonemason or a carpenter or whatever, if they're working on joinery, and again accordingly they would have the drawings for those aspects of the building. So I mean, a little bit like what you've just started thinking about the VR again, you've got a whole host of different professions within the construction and within the design process and the actual construction process. And so I think in those where you would have the different sort of specialists in those areas. So yeah, I think I don't know, sure Charles might want to add in on that one.
I think I need to say that I think the builder is not worried about the artistic nature of a drawing. They just want the most practical way of explaining to them what the architect wants. Lutyens famously described an architectural drawing, and I think not altogether truthfully, described all that an architectural drawing needs to be is a letter to a builder. And I think, say, a practical construction drawing is what the builder really wants, rather than a seductive drawing that is, as I think Fiona mentioned earlier, is the point of getting you the job.
Thank you. I'm going to knock this on the head now and just thank our wonderful speakers, Fiona, Susan and Charles, for this evening. Got some really great questions in the Q&A, so do email in if you want them answered. But I hope you've enjoyed this evening, and do check out the Architecture Drawings book, and we'll see you next time, I hope. Bye.